What's up, Nowa builders? So in this video, we're gonna finish our to-do app with Firestore. So if you did not catch up on the playlist already, which we are trying to build a full to-do app with Nowa and Firebase, we did a full email authentication. We did also Google sign-in. We also showed you how to connect your Firebase project to your app in Nowa. And now we're gonna use Firestore to store the tasks for each user. Now, we released a video yesterday about how to use Firestore in general and how to build queries and how to build collections, but we're going to make this one about the to-do app specifically. Now, it's really important for you to finish the authentication before you jump in to do the part of the Firestore, because we're going to store every task under a specific user. So we need the user ID, which we can fetch after the user sign in. This is why we're going to use the authentication information, the information of the authenticated user to fetch and add tasks. So you need to implement, in case you want the tasks to be not related to a specific user, then you don't need to do the authentication. But in case you want the tasks to be the tasks to be different for every user, then you have to do the authentication first. Okay, so to wrap up what happened last time, if we go to Firebase, we can see that the app is already connected to this project, which is what we did last time. We also enabled the providers of the email and the sign in with Google. And we also had the config file already created for us. So we're all set. So now let's set up the Firestore database. So I'm going to go to my console, to the project inside Firebase console, and I'm going to head to Cloud Firestore. And then I'm going to click on Create Database. So we already saw how to do those things in the last video. So here I'm going to go quick. So first of all, you pick the location on your database, which for me doesn't make a difference. And here I'm going to choose to start in a test mode, which means that any requests on the database will be allowed to read or write. But in the production by default, no request is allowed to happen on the database. But when you go to production, you want to modify this to make it that if the request is coming from an authenticated user who already signed in, then you allow the read or write. Otherwise, you do not allow that. And we're going to see this in another video. But for now, I'm going to go for test mode. So any request will be allowed, but the app is not going to be public, so it's fine for that. So I'm going to create my database. So now our database is created. So the question comes now, how should my database look like? How should the structure or the scheme of the database be? And for our case, for our to-do app, of course, you can read about this more on the Firebase official documentation. But for our case, if you think about it, mainly there's two structures. So let's see them and actually compare them. So the first structure we have is this. So to wrap up a little bit, if you don't know how Firestore works, there is collections and there is documents. Collection is like a folder, and documents is literally the single piece of information that contains some details. So for example, you have a collection. Usually the top level should be collection. So you have multiple collections, and each collection, let's say we have a collection called users. So this collection have documents. Each document represents a specific user. And the single document have something called fields, like email, name. So you can fetch, for example, a specific user by going to the collection and going to grab that user document and load it, and then fetch the value of the fields from that document. Now there is something called sub-collection, which is just a collection, like a folder, but you access that folder or collection from a document. So in the top level, we said we have like a collection, for example, like users collection, which is like a folder that has multiple users. But let's say every user will have their own tasks. So every user, if you think about it, there's another folder that comes with every user, and this folder will have multiple documents. Each document is the task or one of the tasks for that specific user. So you don't want to create manually collections for every user and call every collection a specific name. You just want the location of the collection to come underneath a user document. So if you want to get to the collection that have the tasks for a specific user, you go to the user document first, and from the user document, you can get to his or her own collection that stores the tasks. And because this collection is not in the top level, it comes underneath a document, it's called a sub-collection. So anything that's not a collection in the top, like users collection or something that you can access directly without the need of a document to be before, this is a collection. But a sub-collection, it usually comes underneath a specific document. And usually, let's say if you have a sub-collection, every document in the collection will have their own sub-collection with the same name. So that's a good thing because you can, let's say if you have a users collection, and inside the users collection there's documents. Each document is information about a specific user, but every document have a sub-collection called to-dos. Then you have multiple sub-collections. All of them are called to-dos, but each one comes under a specific document which have a unique ID. So this means that every sub-collection have a unique path, which comes from the unique document that you have to go through first, and then you go to the sub-collection. So in general, this is like I tried to explain to you quickly the collection and sub-collection documents. But of course, you can go to YouTube, you can see a good video from Firebase on that. So let's go back to our To-Do app. And here, I can see one of the structures, which is, I was thinking about creating a collection called users and another collection called to-dos. So the collection that called users will have documents, and each document will have a unique user ID. And inside every document, I will have, let's say, the email of the user, the name of the user, and let's say when the user signed up, for example. Now, we will not implement all of this. We're just seeing example of real, like a full structure if you want to do the full To-Do app. So the other sub-collection, it's called to-dos, and every document inside will have a unique ID, and every document inside the to-dos will present a single task. But what's special here is that you will put all the tasks for all the users in one big collection or folder, and the way to know which task belongs to which user is that you store a field inside every document called user ID. So the user here, which refer to the user ID, is the ID of the user that owns this task, which is, so like this one, the user ID here is the same as this one. So if I am if I signed in and I have a unique user ID, for example, here, and I want to get my tasks, I will search inside this collection to get all the tasks that has a user ID that matches my user ID. So this is how, for example, you can put all the to-dos in one. And this is good, for example, in a case where you want a task to be shared between two users. So you can include two users, for example. You can have a list here, for example, that have the ID of two users, or like a list that has two items, each one is a user ID. And then you can have, when you query, you can have this task to be presented to multiple users. And of course, inside the document, there's the other information like the title of the task, description if you want, completed or not, and the other details here. Now, this is one of the examples. Now, the only bad thing here that every time you want to query to search for documents, you have to include the user ID as a part of the query all the time. And the positive side, as we said, that you can share multiple tasks between multiple users. Now, let's go and think about the other use case. So in the other structure, for example, that we have here, I decided to go with a sub-collection. So I have a collection here that's called users, and every collection have documents that present a single user. And inside the document, I have the email, the name, and let's say when the user signed up. But I created a sub-collection called to-dos under every user, and the to-dos will have documents. Each document will present a task for that user. And in that document, I can see like the title of the task, the description, and all the details that I already saw above. So the good thing about this this structure is that you're keeping the collection small. So instead of searching a big collection that has a lot of documents for all the users, if you want to fetch tasks for a specific user, you only need to go for the user ID of the user and then get all the documents inside. So you don't have to even perform queries to try to search and fetch to-dos that have a specific user ID inside. The bad thing here, or like the limitation here, is that you cannot have tasks that are shared between two users. So the relationship here is one-to-many, which means that one user can have multiple or many tasks, but every task belongs to one user only. But in the previous structure, the positive side, what you can do is that you can have many-to-many relation. That one task can be owned by many users, and a single user can have multiple tasks. But in our case, I don't want to think about the collaboration and those things. I just want every user to get access to their own tasks. So I will go with structure 2. So we're going to create a collection called users, and we'll create a sub-collection called to-dos under every user. All right, let's now jump back and see how to do this inside Nowa. So I can, for example, start here with a collection, and I can put some data for testing. But actually, I did this in the last video. In this video, I'm going to do something different. I will not even touch the collection here. I will include data and test and everything from Nowa itself. So here, I will go to Firestore. And the first thing is I want to include how the collection will look like, or how the schema of the data will look like. So as we said before, I'm going to create a collection called users. And inside the users, I will have, so I'm going to think now about how the document inside users collection will look like. So I can put like a lot of things, but for me, I can just include name for now. So I want the name of the user. I can include profile URL. I can include the time of the sign up. I can include all the information that I want to know about the specific user, but for now, I'm going to keep it for name. And then I want to create a sub-collection under users. So here, if you see the plus, you can add a sub-collection. And here I'm going to call it to-dos. So a to-dos sub-collection is now under the users collection, which means that every document that comes under users collection will point to a sub-collection called to-dos that comes underneath every document. That's the simplest explanation for it. So inside to-dos, how the document inside the sub-collection to-dos will look like. So it will have a name of the task, for example, and it will have is done. And is done is just a Boolean that, so I can change the type from here, or I can change it from here as well. So from here, I'm going to just put Boolean, which is like true or false. And here it will present if the task is done or not. Okay, and here I can say like a default name if I want, so like task name, and is done by default. I want to keep it false. All right, so I created the schema right now. Let's go to queries. So the first thing I want to do, I want to fetch all the tasks for the user. All right, so, okay, first of all, let's actually build the queries first. So get tasks. This will be the name of the first query. So as we explained in the last video, how the query builder works is that the first step, you want to select the collection that you want to apply the query to. So I want to apply my query to the only collection I have, which is the users collection. And as a wrap up, last time we talked about that as long as you see a warning here, this means that your query is not yet completed. And here you can see the return type of the query, which, to be honest, you don't need to worry about it. But the only thing you have to know is that you have to end up your query with get or snapshot. Get, so you will fetch the data for one time. Snapshot, you will open like a live stream with the data. So if something updated in the database, it will automatically update. So, or like add, if you want to add a specific document to the database. Those are the three things that you always have to finish your query with. And it should be only one of those three things. Okay, so now I want to fetch the tasks of a specific user. So let's just go back to the database I was thinking about. So I want first now I'm going to the users collection. And then I want to go to the document with the ID of the user. And then I'm going to go to the collection, which is to-dos. And then I want to get all the documents inside, right? So let's see how to do this. So first, I need to get to a specific document. And the document here, it will ask me to bring the ID of the document. So here, what I'm thinking about, that the ID of the document is the same as the user ID. So let's remember a little bit on the authentication. So remember in the last example, when we did the email authentication, we signed up this test email, which is like nowatestapp@gmail.com. And here I can see a user ID. Now, every user on the database will have a unique user ID. And every document inside the collection in Firestore should have a unique ID. So it's very simple for me to just keep the ID of the document the same as the ID of the user, because otherwise I have to map. I have to be like, if this is the user ID, I need to map from it the document ID. So it's an extra unnecessary step. So the easiest way is that the document ID will be the same as the user ID. So here, since the value is not fixed, so here I'm gonna go to the document for that specific user, and I cannot just write like a fixed value from the query. I need it to depend on the user ID. I'm gonna create a parameter, and there's two ways to do that. So you either, so for example, the document here expects a string. Okay, so if I enter a value here like let's say user123, then every time I run the query, it will always go for that specific user. But for your application, hopefully it will be used by millions. And every user will have their own unique user ID. So you don't want this to be fixed. You want this to be taken from the app after the user sign in. Because you don't want this to be fixed, you want it to be dynamic, you need to create a variable or like a parameter out of it. So you can enter the value later from the app. So I'm going to go to, I will choose again, doc. And then here I can do two things. I can either create a parameter from the type string, and then I can choose it from here because it expects a string and the type here of the parameter is a string, so it matches. But if you don't need to worry about the types, you can simply just click on create new param, and it will automatically create a parameter with the correct type. So let me just delete them both because I got confused. So I'm going to just create a new param. And I'm going to change the name here to user ID. Okay, so here I now accept an input to this query, or I actually require an input to this query when I use it later, which is the user ID. So now I am inside the specific user. And then I can see here my sub-collection, to-dos. You can ask me how Nowa knows about the users and the to-dos. It's actually from the collection. So from right now, we never did any request to Firestore. So here we just define the schema here, and in the query, Nowa can then knows like how to like what collection goes under which collection, and how to build the full, help you build the full query. So now we are inside the to-dos for that user, and then I can just simply use get. So what this will do will go to that specific user and get me all the to-dos in his sub-collection to-dos. Now, you can also do queries. You can use where. So you can say where, for example, I want to only bring the tasks that were not done. So you can say where, for example, is done, and you say not, which is not equal to true. For example, you can enter a value, you can be okay, true. So this is okay, bring me all the tasks for that user which is not true, for example, or which is false. So you can build the query as you want. And you can even do another one, another where, for example, you can apply another condition. You can also then use even order by, so you can order the task, because usually Firestore doesn't store them in the time order. So if you want to order them by time, you have to store time inside the document of the task and then order by that field. But so here you can build a really advanced query, but luckily in our case we don't need that much of an advanced query, so I'm going to delete all of this. So I am now inside the to-dos collection under the user, and what I want to do is to choose snapshots. So snapshots will bring me a live update from the tasks. So when I do that, I don't need to worry about state management inside my app. So if the user added a task, I don't need to worry about updating the UI to show the new task, or when the user, for example, is done with a task and the user click on a task to make it done, I don't need to worry to update the UI. Snapshots, so I need only to send the new values to Firestore, and Firestore will automatically update the UI for me. So with doing this, I'm actually uplifting all my state management from the app to Firestore, and I don't need to worry about managing the state inside the app. I need to only send data to Firestore, and Firestore will automatically update my UI. And so it's the simplest way to build the To-Do app. Later, we're going to see another tutorial on how to do a state management to try to minimize the requests you do on the database, so it doesn't cost you a lot of reads and writes. But for now, we're going to just do it in the simplest way. So here, I have now the query done, okay? So I will then create a new query, and I will call it add task. So I will use this to add a new task to the collection. So again, I need to go to the users, and I want to go to the document, which is the user ID. So I will change this one to user ID, and I want to go to the collections to-dos, and I want to add, and add, expect a document to be from the same structure as the structure you defined here. So here in the subcollection, you define the structure of the to-dos, that every document in the to-dos collection or subcollection should have a name and should have a boolean, which is done. So in the query, when I add a task to the collections to-do, then when I create a parameter, it will be from the type to-dos, which is the type that of a single document inside the collection to-dos, which contains if I want to add a default value, it contains the name and it contains is done. But I don't want to add a default value for now inside. So here, I just want to change the name to task. So this query is literally asking, so it will, like when I use this query in the UI, it will ask me to pass a user ID. So the query knows like to which user I should add the task. And it will also ask me for the task object. So it knows what task needed to be added to the subcollection to-dos of that user. So now I build the full query. I can see the green light here, so I'm good to go. So let me test that. So the first thing is, I'm going to pass like a random user ID. So we're like user ID test 1, 2, 3, okay? And I want to pass an object to the task, which is like, what can I say? Buy milk, okay? And by default, I don't want it to be true. I can run the test. And here it tells me data was added successfully. If I go back to Firestore and I refresh the UI, I can see that the database, so now a user's collection was added, a document was added with the same user ID, which is UID test 1, 2, 3, and inside I can see a sub-collection was added, which is to do, and here I can see the ID of the document, which present the task, and inside I can see buy milk and is done is false. So instead of me, I can randomly, of course, like just add the collections here and call it to do and add the document here and do the same thing. It's the same. But I was like, you know what, since I'm already building the structure inside Nowa, I can do a query to add the data for me. So at least I don't need to worry about, because here in Firestore, you can actually do two documents and mistakenly, like by mistake, maybe change the field's name, maybe choose the wrong type, because it's a NoSQL database. It allows you to put the structure you want. So you can literally put different, like I can add now a document and I can call it like something random, for example, as a name. Like I can say create date, even though I never thought about that. And it will just allow me, even though it doesn't have the same structure as the other documents in the collection. But when you use it inside Nowa, Nowa will maintain the schema that you define here. So if I define that I want a collection called users that has a name, and inside a sub-collection called to-dos that has a name and is done, then any document will be added, will always follow this structure, so you are sure that all the data inside the database follow the same schema. So later when you fetch those data, okay, no error will happen, because when you check, for example, for the is done, there is always going to be is done inside the document because I can literally add like here, the document I added doesn't have is done. So if I fetch it and then I try later to get the is done from the document, there's going to be a problem. So this is why it's important to try to maintain the structure of the database. So for me, I'm going to just delete this one here. And okay, so we tested the query of adding a task. Let's see the query of getting a task. So here, for example, I want to get all the tasks that comes under the user ID, which is the one I created, which is user ID 123. So I'm going to just copy it and then go here and be like, okay, let me test this one. So it actually bought me the tasks for that user. So, notice here that the yellow box means that it's a live updating. So if I added another task to the collection, this will update automatically. So I don't need to even refresh or restart the test. So if I just went here and I'd be like, I will add another task inside the collection to do's under the same user, and I will add just like a random, I'm gonna keep the same structure. So I'm gonna write is name and is done. Is done is a Boolean. So for example, I want the task name. So for example, clean the house, and it's not done. So if I add this, the other test here, if I go back here, I will see that it was added, clean house and false. This is because it's a live stream. If I choose get instead of a snapshot, then I need to run the test again to see the updated value. It will not update automatically. But for my case, I want it to update automatically, so I'm happy with this. All right, so we have the task of get the task or add the task, but then I want another one, which is update the task. So I will add another query called update task. And with update task, I will literally just make the task done or not done. So again, I'm going to go to the user and I will go to the document of the user ID. I will create a parameter and I'm going to call it user ID. Wait, user ID. And I will go to the to-dos and I will go to the document, which is a task itself. So I need to go to the specific task for that user. So I need to go to the user ID first and then to the task ID and then change the is done or like switch it. So because of this, I also need to pass to this query the task ID, not just the user ID. So here I'm going to create another parameter and I will call it task ID, and it's a string as well. So if you choose to create parameter, you need to worry about the type. And then I want to set. So set means you're going to pass a new document and update instead of the one available. So here I need to pass a new task object or to-dos object to the to-dos to update to like. So I'm gonna take the same ID and just like get the content and update it with the new content that I will send. So here I'm gonna create a new parameter and notice that the type is to-dos. So which means that the structure or the object that you need to pass here for the set, it should be from the same type as the to-dos, which is a subcollection here. This is why the type, there's an object. When you create the schema or the collection, Nowa will create automatically a model for the users and a model for the to-dos. And this model will be the model of the single document that will go under the collection to-dos, but the model name is to-dos. So when I go to the query and I like choose set, it will look at the collection, which is to-dos, and it will ask me that the parameter I'm passing here should be from the same structure as to-dos. So to keep it from the same structure, and since Nowa automatically created this structure or model which called to-dos that will have a default the name of the task and the Boolean is done, I need just to pass an object from that model that Nowa created for me when I created the collection. So here I'm just going to change the name of this object or the parameter to task. So here, when I want to test, it will ask me to give the user ID, give the task ID, and give the task itself. So let's try this. So let's go to get tasks and run it. So the user ID was or actually, wait, I'm gonna just go here and be like, okay, so the user ID is this one, the UID test 1, 2, 3. So when I want to update a task, I will pass this user ID. And I want to update, let's say, this one, which is buy milk. So I'm going to keep it, like, let's say I bought milk already. So I want to update this task to make it true. So I will get the ID of the task. Here, I pass it. And then I need to pass a task object or to-dos object. I mean, to-dos because the collection called to-do. So this is like a model of a single document that will go for the collection to-dos. So it's called to-dos. And here I will keep the same name. So I'm going to like buy milk. And I want it to be done. So when I run a test and go back to the documents, I can see that is done is now true. All right. So now we tested the tasks. I mean, we tested the queries, so they all work. So let's now implement this in the UI. So let's go back to the design. And here, okay, what I will do is, first of all, I want to inject the data that I'm getting from the query or from Firestore to the UI. So in this design, I created a list style. So if you want to do this design, you have to, for example, drop a list style, and then here you can choose like the leading widget. Let's say I want to make it a checkbox. So I have it a checkbox. The title is a string already, for example, and I have like a background image. I can choose even selection color, and so we will release a full video on how to do that. But this is a widget from the type list style. This is an alert dialog. So also to design this one, you need to drop a widget that's called alert dialog. And here, for example, again, you can do the same thing. It can be like the content. I want it to be a text field inside. So, and I want to set the size to be auto. So, okay, this is like a very long size. I'm going to just resize it. And I then want to have like an actions. So here I can add an action, and the action can be a button, for example, which is an icon button, which is like add, and I can then like replace this one with like a button called component. So we will see how to design this, but if you want a quick design, this is an alert dialog widget, and that one is a list style widget. And this one is a list view widget. We already released a video about it. So now I have this app. So again, to talk about Data Builder. Data Builder is a wrapper that will get the value or the list from a backend source. So it can be an API, it can be Firebase, it can be Superbase, and inject the output or the list into the app UI. So the Data Builder will pass the data that it gets from a data source to the widget that it's a wrapper for, or any widget below that widget. So here, for example, I want to get the list and show it inside the list view. So here we have a home page and we have a list view underneath it, and that's it. So in the list view itself, the widget, I can add the wrapper, which called Data Builder. So now the list view and any widget underneath the list view will have access to the data that's coming from the Data Builder. But if there's another widget below the home screen, okay, it will not be able to get the data from the Data Builder. So now I just want to use it inside the list, so that's why it's good now to wrap it here. And in the source, I will choose Firebase, and I will choose a query, which is get tasks. And here it will ask me for the user ID, because the Data Builder, it will try to go and run the query to get the tasks and give me the tasks. But it cannot even go to the query because the query asks for a parameter called user ID, which is the one we created here. So we created a parameter called user ID. So now use this query in the UI or in any other place inside Nowa, it will ask me to fill the params. So the user ID, it will be taken from Firebase. So here, I cannot pass a fixed value because for all the users, it will try to go to the same user ID. So I want to get this user ID from I want to get it from the actual user who signed in. So here, because it's not fixed, I need to I can do two things. I can connect this user ID to a variable or a parameter, and then I can later calculate that. But there's something called compute, which is easier. So instead of creating a variable and updating the variable so it updates the screen, I can just do a compute. And compute will create a function or a logic that will run as soon as the screen renders, and it will just calculate something and pass it to the user ID to the query. So it's just like a simplest way of like, instead of making the user ID go to a variable to get the data, but first I need to update that variable and then make the user ID fetch it from that variable, I can be like, you know what? Just calculate, do your own calculation to get the user ID, and without me having to connect it to a variable. So if I open it, it expects a return. So this user ID, the result of the full calculations should end up with a string, because the user ID is a string. So I was like, okay, you do your own calculation, but in the end, give me a string, which is the user ID that I need to use and pass to the query. So here, as we saw before, if you're using already Firebase authentication, inside Firebase category, you will see something called current user. And it's an object that returns another object from the type, like it's an object from the type user, and inside I can get the information of the authenticated user. So this is a null, which means like it's not set if the user is not signed in. But after the user signs in, this is not null. So there's an actual user object that has actual data here. But here, I am doing this logic in the home screen. So I'm 100% sure that this object exists, because the user cannot get to the home screen until they actually pass the authentication. So if they have an object called current user, which means that they are already signed in or they just signed in, then they will get to the home page. So because I'm on the home page, I am sure that this object have data, like this object has data, which is the like email, and if the email is verified. But I care about the user ID. So here I can get the user ID of the user. So if we go back to the authentication, let's say if I signed in with this email, the user ID will be this one, okay? So here I'm passing the user ID and I'm connecting it to return. So, and I close the logic. So this will calculate or go to the current user object that comes from Firebase and fetch the user ID and send the user ID as the value of the parameter user ID to the query that then will go and get all the tasks for that user. All right, good. So now we already customized the data builder, but then now I need to connect the list here, the list view, to the list coming from the data builder. So in the list view here, I can then create here, I can like go to the list and choose data. So data, as if I already explained this in the last Firestore video. So Firestore doesn't give you directly a list of data, but it gives you an object called data, but the type of the object called query snapshot. Why is that? Because this object doesn't only have the list of the data, it also have other information, like the size of the data, like how many documents you're bringing, or like something called metadata or document change. But I care about the docs here. So docs here is a list of something called query document snapshot of to-dos. So it's a list of to-dos, actually, like a list of to-dos, which is a collection we created before. So it's a list that contains a group of documents. Each document is from the type to-do, which is like a documents from that have the same structure as we defined for the to-dos. But it's inside something called query document snapshot. Why is that? We will see later. So just choose that for now. So now I already set I choose a query, which is get the tasks, and I then saw a data object that's coming from the query as a result, but inside it has another variable called documents or docs, and this docs is a list. So if you click here, for example, in the docs here, for example, if I want to connect it again, in the data, the docs here is a list. So the list view always expects a list. So if I connect it to something which is not a list, it will not work. So it has to be a list. And the docs variable inside the object I'm getting from Firebase is a list. So now I connected the list. So now the list view is connected to the list, which is the results of the query get tasks. But now I need to map. I need to send, like the list view. If I click on play, okay, actually I need an emulator here to actually sign in. But here, the thing is, now like the list view, if I receive a list of 3 objects or 4 objects, the list view will render 4 copies of the task tile, because it will render as much as the list contains. But you also need to map of like how the single item from the list should go to the single list tile inside the list view. So to do this, I need to go to the component itself, the task tile, and I need to define what should this task tile component get. So the best, let's say, way to structure it, so think about it this way. You need to try to send a single object to this task tile. So as a parameter, I want to send a to-do, like a single to-do, to this component. Now, the single to-do, the object name is the one we created here, to-dos. So we said that Nowa will create automatically a model called to-dos that will have a name and is done. And this is exactly what I need to send to the component. I need to send that specific object. So in the parameters inside the component, I need to create a parameter called task, and I need the type of this task to be to-dos. Now, because to-dos have, the object has is done, and it has a name of the task, inside the details panel, I can then connect I can go from here, like choose the tasks, or from the task tile, I can go to the title and click on the brush to access the text widget. But the text here of the to-do of the single task tile, it will be taken from the local parameter I created called task. So I created a local parameter called task from the type to-dos. So the type of the parameter is the same type of a single document inside the collection to-dos. And because of that, this object contains 2 variables or 2 parameters, is done as a boolean and the task name. So if I click on it, I can see the name and I can see is done. So I will choose the name, and this will take the default value. So remember here that in the collections, when I created the to-dos collection and I created how the data inside the collection to-dos should look like, I already like entered a default value for each one. So here, because the object is from the type to-dos, which is like the model of that collection, it will take the default value here to render it in the designer for now. But later when we play the app, it will get the actual task. So here now I connected the task name to the text widget, and in the checkbox I can see the value here. So if I uncheck it, it will turn it off. If I check it, it's on. But here it will not be just on or off. It will be also taking from the object that I will send to that task tile. And the object I will send to that task tile, from the task tile itself, I'm going to receive it as a parameter called task. So the parameter here called task, which is from the type to-dos, it's made only to receive an object from the type to-dos, which is a single task present inside the collection to-dos. And from that parameter that I have here, when I receive the object, I can then, from that parameter that I have, extract the name of the task and if the task is done. So in the value here, I don't want it to be fixed. I want it to be taken from the task itself, the parameter. Now, by the way, when you create a parameter here, you create it only for the component, so it will be available under the locals. So here under the locals, this one is the task I created here, which is from the type to-dos. And when I click on it, I can, so the value expects a boolean. You can see here, it expects a boolean. So you have to connect it to something which is boolean. So task itself is from the type to-dos, but I need to get to the is done parameter inside the task, so I can connect it to the to-dos. And by the way, it's because the default value is here, it's false. Here, it showed you that the value here is false. If I actually make the default value here true, then you will see actually like, you will see that if you like move it a little bit to update, you will see that now this one is selected. But I actually will just keep it off for now. Okay, so now I connected the list style here, but also, okay, now for now, I will actually worry about the ID of the task later. So now when I use the task tile, I need to pass an object from the type to-dos to the task tile, so the task tile can render the information of that task. So inside the list here, I have the task tile itself as the placeholder. So in the list view, when you use it, you have to set something called the item builder, which is a placeholder, which is like the widget that the list view will use to render each item from the list that it's connected to. So here I will like, okay, the list is docs that's coming from the Firestore, but the widget, the UI I need you to use to hold a specific item from this list is the component task tile. This is why it will use the task tile here and render as many copies as it needs to cover all the elements inside the list docs. But I also need to tell the list view how to map the data. So the list view, exactly as a data builder, the data builder sends the list or like the object that coming from the query to the widget that below the wrapper or any widget below it. The same thing for the list view. The list view also sends something for the placeholder, which is called the element. So the element is the single item from the list. So remember the docs here? The single item from the docs, let's say this is a document of 5 tasks that was fetched from the Firestore. The single task inside those tasks is the element itself. So here, I just need to map. Like, I need to tell the list view how to send every item from that list to that component. So I created the parameter from the type to-dos inside the component, and then inside the list view, I can see it here. So if I go to the details, so when I choose the placeholder widget that is under the list view, which is from the same as the task tile, I can see here that if I want to use it, I need to pass a task. And this task, if I click here, I'm going to pass like a default value for all of them. So if I like switch it on or off, it will just pass this object for all the parameters inside the list view. But I don't want to pass a fixed value. I want the value of every task to be taken from the item, the single item or the single element inside the list that I connected it, which is this one, to the list view. And this one called element. So when I connect the task here to the element, which is from the type query document. So Firebase wraps everything above their own type. So you see that it's to-dos in the end. So which means like the element has a single to-do, which is like a single task, but it wrap it inside something else called query document snapshot because it can help you get some other data about this document, which is like the document ID. So this task, if I want to get the task ID, I will get it from the object that's called query document snapshot. But to show the things in for the task itself, it's available inside to-dos. So if I choose element and then I choose data, data is from the type to-dos. And the task here is from the type to-dos, which is the structure or the schema of a single document inside the collection to-dos. So when I choose data, then it matches. So now what's happening is this. I am telling the list view how to pass the single item. So I'm telling the list view like, okay, when you use the component task tile to pass the item that you have from the list to the task tile, just pass the data object from the element to the parameter that's called task for that task tile. So I connected the list view to the list itself from the Firestore, and I told the list view how to map every item to the component. Because the list will be like, okay, I have 5 items in the list. So I'm rendering 5 objects from the, or 5 copies from the component task tile. But then it'd be like, okay, how can I pass, or how should I pass every item from the list to that specific component? I'm just telling it to map the data inside the element to the parameter of the component that's called tasks. Now, is there another way? Yes. You can create here, for example, 2 parameters. One called task name and one called isDone. And when you do that, for example, actually, let's do that. How about that? So I'm going to be write like task name, and for example, is done. Is done. Okay? And the is done will be Boolean, for example. This is another way of passing the data. And then in the element, for example, here when I use a list view, when I go to the details, it will ask me for the task name. So I'll be like, okay, bring the single element that is passed to that component and bring the data, and from the data, bring the name. So what I'm doing now, I'm mapping the name and the is done inside, or like as parameters in the component, to the name and is done that's coming from the data, which is from the element. And then, for example, inside the component, I can then, for example, connect the task name. Instead of the task name to be taken from the task object, I can literally make it come from the task name I created. But it's kind of not the best behavior, because then you will need to send multiple items. But it's really good to wrap all of them in a single object. So, and because also the single object or the model is already created for you. So this task, when you created the Firestore, it already created the schema or the model of the to-dos. So why you need to worry about the data types? Be like, okay, I need the task type to literally hold the information of a single document that exists under to-dos. So let me just pass a single object to that list tile from the type to-dos, and then inside render it. Because later, let's say if I want to add something else inside the to-dos collection, I can add it here, for example, and then later I don't need to worry about anything. I can go to the task tile, update the UI. For example, if I want to add like create date, and I can literally just go to the task tile, add a text widget called date, and connect it to the date field inside the same object without changing anything. That's why it's a good practice to try to send a single object to the component and then fetch the data that you need. So in case later you decide to add more things on the object, you literally will have to do the minimal work to update it. All right, let's clean up the examples that I did and go back to the best practice that I only created one parameter called task, and I'm passing the, inside the list, I'm passing the element.data inside. Okay, so now I can show the task for a specific user. Let me also work on the adding tasks, because we have tasks for a random user ID that I created. So to see the full example, let me actually do the adding the task. So here we create an alert dialog as a widget, but you need to make it a component. So I'm going to call it add task dialog. You need to create as a component because later we will see why, but later you will need this to be a component to be able to use it inside the circuit, which is a logic editor. So here in the add button, when I click on press, I need to then call the query, which is add task. So if I go to Firebase, I can see add task as a query. And here I need to add a task to the user. All right, so let's go back. No, wait, actually, that's not true. What I want to happen when I click on the plus is only to show this dialog. That's it. So I will only need to call the function show dialog. That's it. And show dialog will literally show a dialog that's inside builder. So here, for example, if you zoom out, you will see that I am creating an alert dialog widget here, and I'm creating a text widget, and I'm passing the text widget to the dialog, and then I'm returning it to the function show dialog to show that dialog. But this is if you want to create like an alert dialog from scratch. But we actually dropped a widget from the same type, alert dialog, and we created a component out of it, which means that here, instead of creating a new object or a new widget of alert dialog, which is the basic widget, and then like customize it from here, I can just use the one I have in the UI. And then here, then you can click on the value. So this return is expecting a widget to be returned. So here I can literally just click on the null here and choose the widget I created there. So I can see it inside the component. This is why I had to create it as a component or save it as a component, because I can see it here. So now I am actually returning the dialog I made there to the function. So when I go back again here to the logic, which is the once on press, which is show dialog. Inside the builder, I am literally just returning that dialog. So if I can test it quickly by making this home page as a home screen. If I click on add dialog, then I'm showing the dialog. Okay, great. Now something else I want to do, which is I'm now showing the dialog, but I want the dialog when I click on add task to add the task to the database. So let's do that. So first of all, I'm gonna actually turn on autofocus here. Actually, I will keep it off for now, and then later I will see why I need it to be on. So let me go to the button here and change the logic of it. So I want to add a task. So remember we created before a query called add task. This is one. So I'm just gonna call it from the circuit. So inside Firebase, I can see something called add task and connect it here. And it expects the user ID because it's a parameter here, and it expects an object from the type to-dos. So here, I will bring the user from the object we have, which is a current user, and I'm gonna bring the user ID as we did before for the compute. I'm connecting it here. And the task, I need to create a new task or to-dos object and connect it. So why is that? Because the task here we created here, it's from the type to-dos, which is the structure of a single document inside the collection to-dos. So here inside the add task will expect an object from the type to-dos. So I need to create a new one from the same type and connect it here. And then I need to pass the is done, I need to pass the name to this object, and then I can send that to the Firestore. So from where will I get the task name? So the task name will be taken from the text field here. So to be able to get text from the text field, I need to play with the controller. So here I have a controller, but it's not connected to any variable, so I need to create a variable for the controller, and I need to be sure that there's an object inside of it, so it's not empty. And then I can call this one to be text field, for example. And this controller here, I can use this text field variable inside the circuit to get the text that is available inside the text field at that moment. So inside the locals, you will find the text field, and I can get the text from inside and then connect it to the name. And by default, I want is done to be false because I don't want the task. When I add a one, it's not done yet, so I need is done to be false. So I'm adding the task now to the add task. Okay, let's now run and see how this will look like in the app. So let's click on run. Okay, so now the app is running. So now it's automatically signed in to the account because we did not sign out from the last time. So that is a good thing. And I can add a task. So let me add a task, for example, call mom. And add a task. And I can see the task is added, but okay, the pop-up is not removed. So when I click on add task, I also need to do something extra, which is I need to pop the pop-up. So from the logic that's inside the button of the add task inside the dialog, I need to call the navigator object and connect it here and then call pop. So pop will just, it's like back. So when you call pop on a dialog, it will just make the dialog goes away. So I can save, I can then run. So now I'm back here and it's automatically updated. So now if I add another one, like by lunch, for example, or by dinner, for example, dinner. Then I can click on add task, and the pop-up removed, and the dialog went away. And now I can see the task added here. Okay, good. So now we have the task added here. We can add a task, we can see the tasks, but now let's do with the third query, which is modifying the task. Because here if I click, nothing happens because we did not specify the function that will change if the task is done or not. So let's go back. So here in the tasks, what I can do is I can then go to the task, to the checkbox. And inside onChanged here, this will be called when you click on the checkbox. And the value here, which is a Boolean because it has a yellow color, it's a new result. So the value here is false and onChanged is called, which means that the user clicked on it. Then the value here, the one here, is true because it just switches. And inside here, what I want to do is I want to call the last query we created, which is update task. An update task will require three things. It requires the user ID, so I can bring this from the current user object, which you can find under Firebase category, and bring the user ID. And the task here, I can create a new object, okay, from the same type. So the task here wants an object from the type to-dos, which is from the same collection. So here I want to create an object from the same type and connect it here. And it requires the name, which I'm gonna keep the same name. So if I don't want the name to change. So I will. So I'm now inside the task tile. Okay, this one. And remember, in the task tile, you have a parameter called task that holds the object or the task object that's coming from the list. So from that task, because it's from the type to-dos, I have name already and is done. So I have already the name of the task that is passed to that component. So because I want to keep the same name, I will get the name from that parameter and pass it in the new object so I can maintain it. So inside locals, you will find the task parameter, the one we created before for the task tile, and inside I can see the name. So this is the name of the task, and I will keep it the same, so I'm gonna pass it to the new object. But I want to change is done. So I'm gonna get the value from here to is done. So this is a new value that the checkbox is giving me after the user clicked on it and after it changed. So I'm creating an object from the type to-dos, which means the object have the same structure as a single document in the to-dos collection, which needs a name and is done. The name is the same one as the one I have, but is done is the value I'm getting from the function onChanged, and this one is literally the opposite of the previous is done in that task tile. I can also bring, by the way, the task here and bring the is done and change it, but I don't need to do that. This is way easier to do. But there's one thing left, the task ID. So Firestore need to know which task are you changing in the first place, right? So here, this is why now we can see the benefit of having something called query snapshot or query document snapshot that comes from Firebase. So here inside, we said that inside the list view, inside the home screen, we passed element.data. Element is something called query document snapshot that has information about that document, which is the task, such as the task ID. And the data is the data of that document, like the name of the task and if the task is done. So because I need the task ID, I also need to pass a task ID for every component from every component of task tile. So since I'm already passing the task parameter, I also want to create another one called task ID. I'm going to keep it capital. And then I will actually, for this parameter, I'm not going to even connect it here. I don't need to display it. So it doesn't mean that if you have a parameter here that you need to connect it to the UI. You can literally have a parameter just to store data inside that instance of the component, so you can use it inside the logic. So it doesn't have to be connected to the details. Because here when we created the task object, we used it inside the name, the text here, like the task name, we connected to the name, and the same thing for the checkbox, we connected is done to the value inside the checkbox. But I don't need to display anything for the task ID. I just need it to be stored inside. So now since we have the task ID inside, when I pass the single item from the list to that instance of the task tile, I don't want just to pass the task object. I also want to pass the task ID. And the element that's the single item that's coming from the list view, it has other things than the data. So the data is the object to-dos, which have is done and the name of the task, but I also can see the ID. So now the list view is just passing the task ID to that instance of the component task tile beside the task object itself, which is the data inside the element. So now I have the ID. So if I go back to the logic, which is doing the checkbox inside the locals, I can see now the task ID that I'm getting from the list view. So from the task ID, I would just pass it to the update task. That's it. So let's click on hot restart and go back to the emulator. Okay, so now it's updated. So let's see. So now we can do the checkbox and we can remove the checkbox. So if we want to check from the database itself inside the Firestore, we can see that here I have this document, which is a user I signed in with, and it has the collection to-dos, and it has two tasks, which is buy dinner and call mom. So call mom now is true. If we go to the emulator and change it to false, it will then automatically change to false. And then I can also add another task like, for example, charge for internet, or let's say charge credit, for example, credit, and we click on add task, then it's added, and we can see here it's added, and we can checkbox, and it's amazing. So now what we need to do is we need to set the delete to delete a task. So let's go back to the Nowa, to the board, and in the task tile, I can add something called where is it? The trailing, which is a widget that will comes in the end of the task tile. And I want it to be an icon button, and this icon button, I can modify the icon itself here, so I can go inside the icon widget and change it to delete. And then I want to delete a specific task. So I need to add the query for that, because I think we forgot to add the query for it. So yes, we need to add a query called delete task. And inside it, I want to apply it to the users collection and go to document, which is the same of the user ID document, and then get to the collection, and then get to the document, which is a task, and the type of the task, the type of the document will be the task ID, which is the, so now I'm getting to the user ID, and then I'm getting to the to-do itself from the ID, which is a task ID, and then I want to delete. That's it. So now I can inject the user ID and the task ID and delete it from the database. So going back again to the delete itself, let's go to the onPress, which is the function that will be executed when the user clicks on that icon button. And I will call Firebase delete task, which is the one we just added. And here I will bring the user ID. Again, from Firebase, you can find the current user and get the user ID and connect it to the user ID. And from the task ID, I also have it inside the task tile as a local variable here, a local parameter. And then I can, so of course I can also specify some logic inside on value, which means like when the delete is successful, but I don't need that. I can see the delete happening. Like I can also specify, let's say I can show an error inside here, like a snack bar, like if the delete did not happen, if the internet was not there. But for now, I'm not gonna do that. So we added the logic. Let's just now save and update and open the emulator. And now we can try to delete a task, and it was deleted. So let's try to delete this one. I can check this one. I can uncheck it, delete it, add another one. Book flight, for example. Let's say call friend, for example, and I can add like send email, and I can now check, I can delete. So we have the To-Do app complete. And if you sign from another user, it will show you a different tasks. It will show you first of all an empty list, and then it will show a different task. So amazing. We are now almost done with the task, with the To-Do app. So let's see if we need to do something else. So if I want to modify the app, okay, so here there's one small thing that annoys me. When I click on plus, I need to then click on the text field, but I can do something called autofocus. So when I turn this on and then run the app again, so what's gonna happen is that when I click on plus, it will automatically focus on the text field, and I can literally just write without me trying to have to click on the text field. And I can add this task, but I don't need it, I can remove it. Amazing. So now we are done. But I can do one small thing to show you more on the queries, on the power of the queries. Let's say I want to only see the tasks that are not done. So if I have a task that's done, like call mom, and I already like done with it, I don't need to like click done and delete it, but I just want to see the tasks that are still not done. So what I'm gonna do simply is I will go again to the Firestore, actually have it opened, and on get the task, I will add a small logic, which is like, I want the collections, the tasks inside the user ID, where is done is equal to. Here, I don't need a parameter because I don't need to pass it from outside. It's a fixed value. So I will enter a value, which is false. Now, because it's a Boolean, you will see this checkbox. So I want the tasks which are not done, and then end it up with a snapshot. Amazing. Save it. And then let's update the app and see how it will work. So actually, I think the task that is done is already disappeared if you saw it. So if I click on this one, it disappeared. Now it was not, it didn't, like I can still see it in the database, but because it's done, which is this one, send email, I cannot see it inside, I cannot see it inside the app. So call a friend is the only one that's not done. So let's check. Send email is true, call friend is false, and call mom is true. So if we add another one like book flight, or let's say book train, and I can see it, for example, it's added here, but if I check it like it's done, then it gets hidden from the UI because we are having a snapshot, so it automatically updates the UI. Using snapshot will just update, will just like show the updates in the UI automatically as it happens. So now you're done with the To-Do app. Congrats. So now you can build a full To-Do app from scratch and actually publish it on the App Store and Play Store, even download the Flutter code with a really nice design. So congrats on that. I'm happy that you made it to this level. Please, if you build this app, show us and try to be creative in the UI and be creative with the queries and try to just surprise us of how good your app is. So please, if you build this app, share it with us on our community, on community.nowa.dev, or in our Discord community, and we would love to give you our own kind of helpful tips, hopefully. So thank you for watching, and let's go build something big.